everybody. My name is Patrick Fisher, and I am the Executive Director of Erie Arts and Culture. I'll turn it on. There we go. Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of Erie Arts and Culture, and I thank you all for joining us this evening at the Erie Art Museum. First, I want to acknowledge our partnerships that have made this possible this evening, both Erie Art Museum as well as Community Access Media. We appreciate both them hosting this conversation and assisting us with live streaming this conversation. I also want to thank the Erie Community Foundation, who is the supporter of our Visiting Artist program, which is what brings Tony Rodriguez here to Erie, Pennsylvania from Jacksonville, Florida. I work in a sector where almost each and every day I have to make the case that the arts are not a luxury item. And to be honest, it sometimes gets a little bit old because I also work in a sector where I have the privilege each and every day to see how the work that is done within our sector changes lives. We believe that the arts not only have an economic impact in our community, but they also have a personal impact in our community. And what you'll see this evening is a testament to that. I want to thank our moderator and panelists, Ken Nixon, Maria Gellner, Tony Rodriguez, and Antonio Howard. And with that, I hand it over to them for Create a Path for Change.
Can you hear me? Good? Okay. Okay, thank you, Patrick. Appreciate you having me here as moderator for this evening. I'm very privileged and honored. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to hear from each of our panelists first, and then we'll get into a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll also wrap up with our last 30 minutes or so being Q&A from the audience. So what I'm going to do now is just going to start off. Maria, you ready to start us off for tonight?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, all right, I think we're good with the microphone. So I want to talk a little bit, just as we begin, about how this event was billed and how we think about children in the criminal legal system. I have 2 children, and I call them children. I don't call them juveniles. But as a lawyer, been a trial lawyer for the last decade, as a lawyer, we are trained to think about the juvenile system. And as citizens, we think about juveniles, juvenile delinquency, and the juvenile delinquency system. And so I am not the word police. I am not here to police your words, but I do want to invite everybody, as I try to invite myself on a regular basis, to think about how what we do as a society would change if we thought about these children as children, because they are children. And so with that as sort of our beginning, we can jump into our presentation tonight. And what I want to do is really just begin to set the stage for a little bit of the system and the situation that we find ourselves in as a country and in Pennsylvania right now. So in Pennsylvania, this chart is showing for all adults, not just for children, but in Pennsylvania, since the 70s, our incarceration rates have absolutely skyrocketed. And if you compare this, which I have on many occasions, to the crime rates in our Commonwealth, crime fluctuates but stays fairly steady on the graph, whereas the incarceration rates just continue to go up and up and up and up. And that includes children. And so, as I said, since the early 80s, incarceration in our state has grown by about 300%. So if you don't know, now you know that mass incarceration is real. It is devastating families in Pennsylvania, and it can also devastate many, many children and their families in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, we have on our panel an individual who I'm proud to call my colleague, who was sentenced to life in prison as a child. And Pennsylvania, we have more prisoners serving life sentences for crimes that they committed in or participated in as children than any other state. So Pennsylvania doesn't have a small problem in the way that we treat children in the criminal legal system. We have a very, very large problem. And I also want to note that the crime statistics that I cited a few minutes ago, staying fairly steady as incarceration for adults and children has gone up over the last few decades, also proves that it really has not made us safer. The numbers are not lower in crime than they were when mass incarceration started. So harsh sentencing, based on the evidence and the data, much of it from the Department of Justice and the FBI, has not made us safer as a community, which is usually the justification for it, but they actually don't correlate. So recently, in the last few years, the Pennsylvania legislature did a bipartisan juvenile justice task force because of recognizing some of what I've just discussed, and they came out with a task force report. This was bipartisan. It was not aligned with any political party particularly or interest. There were representatives of every party on it, and I urge everybody to take a look, if you're able at home, to Google that task force, because it definitely highlights a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about here tonight, or that will inform the meta conversation of what we're talking about. What that task force found was that 2/3 of youth are entering the juvenile justice system in Pennsylvania for misdemeanors or contempt charges from magisterial district courts for failing to pay fines. So actually failing to pay court fees and obligations imposed as a result of going through the system can become its own crime in Pennsylvania. And we have a huge bulk of children entering the system, staying in the system for that, not for new offenses. And the report also showed that over-involvement in the system increases a child's likelihood to reoffend. And we actually see this with adults too. I've done a lot of analysis on this. If you have lower risk folks on probation, parole, in the system, in prison for too long, it's actually gonna make the situation worse for them, for their community, for society. The government shouldn't be overreaching and keeping people on supervision a day more than is necessary, and the data shows that that actually harms them and us as a community. The commission also found that taking children out of their homes and putting them in juvenile placements is extremely expensive for us Pennsylvanians as taxpayers. And also it's not effective for the youth, for their family, and for the community. And so typically, on average, young people are cycling through residential facilities, both as punishment and to get treatment, for an average of 16 months away from their families, and are typically on supervision for about 3 years. And I have to note here that in Pennsylvania, implicating Erie County as well, we have had several scandals in recent years involving juvenile placements. So, you know, as an Erie County practitioner, I had been under the impression that the Glen Mills School for children, for juveniles, as a placement was one of the better placements. And for the most part, it's what everyone in the criminal legal system thought, including me, for quite some time. It was closed down. All you have to do is Google the Glen Mills School. It was closed down, and the report that came out of that showed decades of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse on the children who were sent to the Glen Mills School, and it was closed down, I believe, just about 2 years ago. Multiple other facilities have closed for similar reasons in the past few years in Pennsylvania, and many children from Erie County were sent to those facilities. Racial disparities should also be of great concern to all of us. The bipartisan Pennsylvania legislative report showed that for children in the system, the likelihood that similarly situated youth, meaning they have the same type of crime, same level of restitution, same level of harm, received very different responses for even identical behavior based on their race. And again, this is in our elected officials' bipartisan task force report that you can Google and definitely read for yourself. These were their recommendations, including strengthened due process for children, the right to an attorney, various things throughout the court process, stop and narrow the criteria for trying young people as adults. If a child is a child and their brain hasn't developed, regardless of what they are accused of, right? Not convicted of, accused of, as a community, shouldn't we recognize that children are children? Not to say that there's no accountability, not to say that things don't need to be done, very serious things don't need to be done in the wake of a serious crime, but aren't children children? Because what we do currently in our system is say that not all children are children. And we know that that has disproportionate racial and other disparities. Another recommendation was to raise the minimum age for when a youth can be tried in juvenile court. And they went on to talk about how we can reinvest the really millions of dollars of cost savings of doing that in restorative justice practices, which include much of what you're going to hear about today. And so I will, in just a moment, turn over the presentation to the folks on our panel who know a lot more than I do about arts and diversionary practices involving arts for children. But I can say definitively, having worked in the system for the last 10 years, that what we are doing is not working. And we are not safer. And I'm the mother of 2 children in our community, and I want very much for our community to be safe. But what we are doing is not working. It's exorbitantly expensive, and it's devastating to families and children. So the need is very complex, and we really need to begin thinking outside of the box and creatively in a way that we haven't done in several decades to begin to address these problems. And with that, I'm going to pass it on down.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Maria.
Well, thanks for being here. Can you hear me okay without trying not to shout through the mask? Well, I did my first session inside the Johnny Good pretrial detention center. Just remember that it was sometime before the year 2000. And I started, it was just a job, it was a gig, and I don't know at what point it became something much, much more. First of all, I'd like to say that our mission is first to provide a rich and rewarding studio experience and an opportunity for our students to experience success and to be seen and to be viewed as something other than a number and their last name and the mugshot that was probably on local television. Part of doing so, we exhibit their work in the community annually. In recent years, there's been an exhibition of student work from Cathedral Arts Project, which is the nonprofit in Jacksonville that funds and administrates my program. We do an annual exhibition at Jacksonville University. Obviously, our students aren't allowed to attend, but we share through video and photographs their work in the community. Learning painting, in this case, and art is not the bottom line for us. We're trying to instill a sense of self-awareness and awareness of other people's thoughts and perspectives. And in doing so, also to establish trust. And the main, one of the main things that our kids bring in is in the facility, there's really no room for that, and they understand this. It's a really difficult environment. It's built so that cooperating with any sort of program is viewed as a weakness, and breaking through that is really the first step. And convincing them that whoever's, the administrator or in my case, me, is that you're worthy of their trust, first of all, and then it's okay. Other principles that we try to teach are teamwork, leadership, learning to give, and also accept constructive criticism. And we'll do this in working critiques and critiques of final work, which I try to frame as informal-ish discussions where, again, the vehicle, the painting is a jumping off point, but this is really about how to share ideas, agree and disagree in a constructive manner without taking things personally, and also to understand if there are 10 students in the room and then me, there are going to be 11 different perspectives of any given thing, okay? Sorry, I'm referring to my notes on my phone. Again, another big emphasis is language and communication skills. This starts with titling paintings. So we often begin with, I just ask the students just to produce abstract paintings, okay? Nothing, we're not trying to depict a person, a place, a thing, or anything like this. We're just dealing with color and gestures on the canvas. I've sort of learned through trial and error that this is a thing that's, it's easier for a jumping off point for them to start. The painting on the left was a collaborative effort. It's called Honey Dripper, and I don't think you have that reference here in the north. It's a southern thing, but it's something that'll also, think of lemonade stands or something, but it's usually a mixture of sort of Kool-Aid and chopped fruit, frozen, summertime thing, which all these kids, it's a very familiar and comforting memory for a lot of these kids. Displaying some of, the optimism that they display frequently, which just, it continually floors me. The image on the top right that was completed by two brothers. They were there on separate charges. I'll let the work speak for itself. The image on the bottom, I'll tell you a little bit more about that artist as we go on. And then I was speaking about language and critical thinking skills. This artist, this is based on, is a well-known artist named Christopher Wool that worked in this format of stenciled word paintings. So, in these, I asked the students, what they thought about them. A lot of times they're just, they're sort of dry jokes and very sardonic wit that's employed. So, in doing so, I'm asking them, we're working with advanced concepts such as irony and dark humor and jokes and things like that in order to convey a serious topic. Again, for starting points, I brought in a list of idioms and cliches and things and then asked, how can we turn those on their head? And I think everyone's heard the phrase, it's a jungle out there. One of the kids immediately, was really quick on this and spun that around from their perspective. The one on the bottom right, the student, this was a part, and he wasn't a stellar student in the painting department up to this point. He was about to age out, and he was one of the ones that they would use. They since stopped doing that, but it was basically a scared straight type thing, which is court mandated for some teenagers and their parents to attend. He would go and talk to them. And this was part of a rhyme that he made in addressing the students. There's a choice curse word that was included in there that we edited out, but also just because of space. Again, this exercise too, everything's multi-layered, they're collaborative, and you can see the one on the right, it's also just a good exercise in patience, and these things take, a couple, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to complete. So there's an underlying idea that, there's not immediate gratification, it takes planning, there's a little bit of math involved, and, how many letters can we fit on, on a particular thing, and then also editing the words. Next, again, I spoke about giving these children a chance to experience success and something to be proud of. So a lot of times kids will come in and, they're suspicious of a program and okay, I'm just kind of here to get out of the pod and look out the window, etc. And, what are you really going to teach me? So again, when we moved on from the abstract paintings, a little bit I brought in, they were asking me, how do we do this? And I gave a little art history lecture about the use of the camera obscura in painting before photography, which was basically just using lenses to trace landscapes and portraits and things like that to block them out. So in these projects, I will, if necessary, this is more than just a class. This is a collaborative effort, and for me, I will, I'll take their hand at this point, figuratively, and I'm here. We're doing this together, and I'm not going to let you look foolish, and I'm not going to let the class look foolish. And so, you can see some of these, and like I said, the response. Even from staff and corrections officers who are often skeptical of what we're doing in the program, and it's art, it's playtime and stuff. Then they're trotting these out from our classroom, back to the dorm area or something where they're going to be stored in the meantime, and to see these kids, like I said, even corrections officers who are not all, but some are skeptical of the program to say the least, and don't have high opinions of the kids, to see this, wow, you did this, I've done this, we did this together. Again, a lot, it's a common thing. Is this something that most of these children have been deprived of, is to be seen, again, for something other than an inmate, a criminal, a student that's been suspended, a student that's constantly being suspended, a student that's been expelled, a kid that's been to juvie over and over. It's about shifting the mindset about themselves, of their self-opinion. I'll share them on my social media accounts, etc. And again, just the simple reaction of seeing strangers throwing likes and supportive comments of them. I can't think of the hardest kid that I haven't seen meaningfully affected by this. And again, beyond the art part is that, it's showing them that they are capable of doing positive things and receiving positive and being worthy of positive reinforcement. Let's keep going. Again, getting back to, we really want to is provide this 2-hour studio time that is it's a place to think, it's a place to be, that they can let their guard down somewhat, and to really be a cocoon. That sounds hokey, but these two photos I think convey that to me a lot. There's this window which competes with my attention all the time. Our students do not have windows in the juvenile dorm. They're looking down here there's the stadium where the NFL team plays. In the fall, there's the city fair with the lights. A lot of these kids, I would say, I don't know, the majority, have never been, we're 2 hours from Disney World. These kids have never been to Disney World. They haven't been to amusement parks. That was their amusement park every year growing up, was, a few rides with some, whatever, junk food booths and stuff. And and some lights, a couple roller coasters, a Ferris wheel, that is, and to see them at that time of year, usually it's dark by the time we're leaving class and the lights are on, and I don't know, it's profound. Again, keep in mind also some of these kids are coming from different neighborhoods and different gang affiliations and things. There's just so much to overcome. And I don't know, here we are. Okay, so this last painting, this is not the artist in the photograph, by the way, was completed by a student that, he was 15 years old when I met him in our class. The painting is called Zacia's Paradise, and he asked me if he could do this one painting. He was one of the most productive students in my class. He was on the AB honor roll while he was in school there in the jail. He had a problem with an attention span thing that he and I worked out, some sort of guidelines and signals for him to let me know when he was having a problem, and we would work through that. So again, I said he was one of the most productive members of the class, zipping around, always busy, always helping. This kid commanded attention. The other kids really respected him. He was a great leader, and I had eventually, one painting he titled Hot Dog, and I started calling him Hot Dog. That became his nickname, even in the dorms and through some of the corrections officers for years. He asked me if he could do this. It was a tribute painting. It was someone who was really close to his family that was in the community that was killed just before he did the painting. This was included in an exhibition in 2017 at the Lafrano Gallery at the University of North Florida. Again, Zacia's Paradise. So Hot Dog was, I saw him, he went away, I think it was 18 months, finally his sentence. He was in the jail for about 3 years. He left, he was back on some sort of a probation violation. I ran into him in the hallway on his way to a visit. Obviously he was over 18 at that point. Just before the COVID lockdown, Johnny was released in, I believe it was late May of last year, 2020, and he was killed on July 5th of the same year, of 2020. So, I hope that story, that his story serves to humanize. I can't count how many again, children, not juveniles, that have passed through my class that are they're in the same circumstance as him, and it's real. And in this case, I still haven't processed it, and again, we have to do better. And in this case, this kid, I knew him for, he was in my class for, I would say, 3 years. And, I liked him, I loved him, I'm not, I don't know, I can't adequately convey to you, what, it's a complete waste. And this was a young man that had a wealth of potential, a great smile. He wasn't an inmate, this was a human being. And with all this, I don't mind telling you, and thanks Antonio for the boost, is that I'm mad, I'm angry. This has to stop. What we're doing is not working, period. End of story. And again, I'll say, where I live, Jacksonville, remains the murder capital per capita of Florida, with 14.5 murders per 100,000 people. Meaningful rehabilitation includes providing understanding, dignity, solidarity, and belief in the potential of all human beings. I'll hand it over to Antonio after that. Thank you.
So, my name is Antonio Howard. I'm Peggy's son. I refer to myself as Peggy's son as acknowledgement to my mother and with the hopes that my demonstration as a man will mitigate the embarrassment I caused her during my childhood. I have the unfortunate and unwanted distinction of being what in Pennsylvania is called a juvenile lifer, meaning that I was sentenced to life without parole 26 and a half years ago when I was 15 years old for my participation in a crime that resulted in the senseless shooting death of an elder citizen by the name of Richard Stevens. And I invoke his name here as a reminder to myself that my demonstration is not only to honor my mother, but the memory of Richard Stevens and the second chance that his family afforded me. I painted this piece called Juvenile Life Without Parole while I was in prison in an attempt to capture what the experience of serving life in prison was for me. It was nothing less than traumatic. It was nothing less than ironic, given the fact that as a child, I was referred to by the rest of the world as a grown man, and the difficulty it was for me to reconcile that reality. And to match that reality, I had to become a grown man, and in many cases, become even more violent than I had been previously, for the sole purpose of giving myself space so that I could develop and figure out who the hell I was as a child. There's a misconception that when children or adults are incarcerated, that somehow the transformative power of trauma becomes a special kind of experience that turns us into better citizens. And it doesn't. The trauma we experience, our bodies remember, and we become more angry. And I experienced that. I experienced it, and I tried to channel it through various ways. One of them happens to be through the creative arts, which I stumbled upon one day during my infatuation with warfare. I became enamored with shields, which to me were the ideal defensive and offensive weapons. Similarly, the human face, to me, was a very effective offensive and defensive weapons. And so I sought to merge the two through a series that I created while in prison called The Many Faces of Life. Which one of these do I press? This one? Mm-hmm. So these are masks that started off as shields, essentially. And the human characteristics that I gave the masks, to me, as I said, represented that defensive and offensive weapon that could be used under any circumstance, right? And growing up, you could be disciplined for looking adults in the eyes, right? I don't come from that community that teaches you to look people in the eyes and shake their hands. I come from that community where if a child's eyes aren't downcast, then it's a challenge to authority. Like any artist starting off, although I had seen eyes my entire life, I couldn't draw an eye to save my life, right? I had no memory as to what eyes looked like, especially in adults' eyes, right? So I just drew cavities to represent those eyes. And I began to include color in my mask as a way of trying to channel some of the emotions that I would feel when I would think about the human face, right? Not only could the human face telegraph the kind of treatment I would be subjected to, it could also confuse me as to what to expect from people who would smile at you but then hurt you, or people who would present an angry face but then treat you well. So my mask kind of captured that experience for me. And I produced a lot more than what are here, but they were essentially my beginning into art. So through my transitions in art while in prison, I started to kind of try to branch out into human figures. The relationship between masks and face were one thing, but how could I make those masks interact with the material I was reading, the growth and development that I was experiencing, and the trajectory I was on, right? And so I painted a lot of things that essentially deified women. I began to study things that made me change my perspective about women, and also reassess my place in this world in relationship to women. And so you would see a lot of angelic figures that were feminine in nature, but to me captured the kind of masculinity and confidence that isn't normally attributed to the feminine character. These are several depictions of the mural experience that I've been involved in since my release. Since my release, I've painted several community murals and discovered something about painting that I hadn't discovered while I was in prison, and that is the art is secondary to the process. As beautiful as artists like myself and others can render images for all to appreciate, the true beauty is the ability to bring the community together and participate in the process. And for me, the process is the most important thing, and especially when we talk about children in placements. So I was exposed to the creative arts, as I said, while in prison, but it was through writing that I discovered that I could be anything that I wanted to be, right? I would read judicial opinions. I would read different writings that people would consider scholarly and think to myself, I could never do that, right? I believed that people who wrote well simply sat down and produced a beautiful body of work, right? You either were good at it or you weren't. And it wasn't until I started studying law and reading books about the writing process that I discovered that it was through writing and rewriting, editing and re-editing, that our writing became great. And once I discovered that process, I became really enthusiastic about it, and I wanted to share it with everyone, right? I would write essays and share them with people, not the polished version. Like, I was eager to share the version with the lines through the misspellings, where I've changed around paragraphs and say, read this one first, read that right. I was excited about that process, and what I discovered was that no one gave a damn about the process. They only wanted to see the beautiful end product. And I mention that because I draw the parallel between the way the community is not interested in the process of transformation. Kids are sent to juvenile placements and we're expected to come out works of art. And nobody cares or pays attention to the fucking process. The process is so important. When you have a child who is still developing, surrounded by a group of men, not just prisoners, but adults who are policing them, who have carte blanche to impress upon the children anything they want to without fear of consequence or repercussions. These are the people in charge of our editing processes. These are the people who keep revising the codes that we are programmed with as we move through life. And the community is completely amputated from that process, the most important process. And there's a belief in these placements that you can bludgeon children into being scholars. You can brutalize us into being good human beings, productive and healthy citizens. Salah. Salah. The art process is the thing that gave me the insight to understand that my way to transformation was to immerse myself in the process, the editing process. Being able to take a straight line and through a few eraser marks and a few ticks of the pencil, turn it into a circle. To me, it meant that you can make the world bend to your will through the process, to learn the process. Our current state of criminal justice practices essentially remove us from the process. They make us the kids on the basketball court or the dodgeball court who's always picked last. I don't know if any of you have ever been in those circumstances where you were picked last for everything, but it has a debilitating effect on your conscience and your psyche. When we come out into society, we still wear that scarlet letter that says the rest of the community and all of our efforts should choose us last, if at all. We walk around with that for the rest of our lives, and essentially removing us from any healthy process in life. And I know many of my peers have been removed from that process and have decided to create their own way. And creating their own way means reinventing the wheel, figuring it out on their own. And when left to our own devices with no guidance, no elders, no one who cares about us to show us the right way, give us the right teachings, we generally choose wrong. So art essentially becomes a way to take back community power, from my perspective. It's an icebreaker for one. It's a non-competitive way to invite people in to say, welcome back to the process. And the first requirement of the process is to recognize that the end result is not the pursuit. The process involves getting to know people, getting to know your limitations, but first and foremost, recognizing that we are all equal, so you gotta fuck up first. Everybody is required to fuck up. Paint an eye that doesn't look like an eye, and not aspire to paint the eye that looks human. Everybody can paint an eye or draw an eye that doesn't look like an eye. Art is an equalizer in that way. But through that first step, we begin conversations. We begin to learn each other again. We begin to respect each other's experiences. We begin to develop relationships that would not ordinarily develop because we don't run in the same social circles. But art has pulled us together. And that process is the most important thing, and I think establishing programs that allow us to repeat those processes over and over again and exposing children to those processes is the most important thing of winning our children back, winning our communities back, and winning our humanity back. I ask each of you to consider if You were on vacation on the back of a cruise ship with your wife and kids, and you heard 4 splashes in the water. And you looked, and there were children in the water. One was screaming for his mother. One was praying to God. The other was channeling his inner Spider-Man, like he could throw webs to the boat and pull himself back in, but he was still drowning. And the other one was kicking and flailing his feet, trying to survive. Would you save one or all of them? If you had the power to save one or all of them, which would you save? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is you would fucking save them all. They're kids. They're fucking kids. And you don't make distinctions based upon one perceived to have mental illness because he's pretending to be Spider-Man. You don't make distinctions with one being violent because he's kicking and flailing his fucking arms trying to survive. They're kids. You save them. That's it. You save them. There is no other answer. I know that I was responsible for irreparable harm caused to my community. And I work every day to try and repair some of the damage that I've done. But in trying to repair some of that damage that I've done, I need to impress upon adults that I was a child once too, and I am acting and speaking for the child that I once was, and the children who will come after me, directly to the adults who attempt to grow us into other adults when you become angry at us. It is no less caustic, it is no less sinister, it is no less inhumane to grow us for the purpose of abusing us, to grow us for the purpose of evening the score, to grow us for the purpose of enslaving us, to grow us for the purpose of starving us, to grow us for the purpose of purging whatever past traumas you've experienced as children. And I would ask you to consider art as a pathway back, not only for children returning to our communities, but for ourselves as adults, to reestablish relationships. That's all I got to say.
So we have a lot of very heartfelt conversation, and very appreciated from each of our panelists. It's hard to follow that up, as moderator, where do you go next, So, but I really appreciate that honesty and that passion. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get into the Q&A session. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take a couple questions past our panelists here. So to start us off for this first one, I'm going to ask to hear from each and every one of you, and take it 2 to 3 minutes at a time. So let's start off with this. So from your perspective, I would like you to make connections to, state examples how, or give insight on systemic racism and the role that it's playing in these alarming and staggering youth incarceration numbers. So again, take a little time, process that, but I'd like to hear from each one of you about the perspective, make connections, examples, and insights. How is systemic racism playing a role in what we just discussed with these youth incarceration numbers? So why don't we start off? We'll just go in order right now. So Maria, you start us off?
Sure, thank you. And I also want to thank Antonio for his bravery in talking to us tonight about these issues. I am certainly not brave enough to stand up here and talk to you about the worst thing that I've ever done or the things that I struggle with the most. And so I applaud him for doing that and having the bravery to try to make change in our community by doing that. So in terms of systemic racism and its role in these numbers, you know, I just really want to emphasize that it's not up for debate. The time for debate on that has long passed, and the data and the evidence from neutral sources, including our own government here in Pennsylvania, is crystal clear. So again, according to state sources, including the bipartisan report that I mentioned earlier, as well as the Juvenile Court Judges Commission of Pennsylvania, which publishes a report on these issues every year, the racial ethnic distribution of youth in Pennsylvania in the system, the delinquency system, is as follows. For Pennsylvania children aged 10 to 17, they make up black youth make up 14.3% of the total population, and yet they make up 38% of all delinquency allegations. So well over double their representation in our population. And so when we talk about, you know, systemic racism, again, if you didn't know, now you know. That is real, it is present, and it is something that we need to grapple with. And it's very complex. All of these issues are complex, including how we deal with children who have committed harm. I'm not suggesting that any of these are easy issues. And I can tell you from a personal perspective, I've had to struggle with this as well, right? We all do. And so when I look at a child who looks different than my children, and I'm his attorney, I have to question, am I looking at this child in the same way that I look at my child? Am I seeing mental health issues in the same way that I would see it in my child? And so on and so forth. So I think it's evident, and if anybody would like resources on that, or for me to, you know, show you the literature that I'm referencing, I'm happy to stay after and talk to you about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna.
I think I can answer that really briefly, in that my class is usually capped at 10 to 12 students. It's uncommon that all the students are not black children, period. I believe at one point last year we had, there was one white kid and one Latino, and 8, 9, 10 black children, period. Also, without having the statistics in front of me, we know that there's a correlation between poverty and crime, and also how poor people are dealt with within and their options within the criminal justice system. And our city and county, Duval County, is not unlike the rest of the country, in that black people suffer far disproportionately with poverty than the general population. And I'll just hand it off there.
So I don't have statistics, and I'm not a fan of statistics. I believe statistics are used to convince somebody of your perspective, and I spent a lot of years not caring if people shared my perspective. So all I have is anecdotes. As a kid, I was involved in crimes that involved other white kids. But you will see nowhere on my criminal jacket the names of any of those white kids. Because while I was taken to the precinct, they took them home. They took them home to their parents. And I didn't learn that years later until I came across some of them while I was in prison. And for me, that was a clarion reminder of my caste and how racism played a part in my trajectory versus theirs. I took a lot of vocational training while I was in prison, and each vocational instructor I had was a white man, and we would often have heart-to-heart conversations at some point in our relationships. And they would always tell me secretly that they're glad that they never went to prison for the things that they did and ended up in my circumstances. And they would always wish me well. And I would always ask, how is it that you did those things and you never ended up here? And they would tell me that the police took them home when they got caught. Took them home. I've never experienced being caught for a wrong and then been taken home. And those anecdotes are always in the back of my mind when we talk about how racism or systemic racism have affected the trajectory of our society when it comes to incarceration rates. Because I believe that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? It's an indication that these places that are constructed for so-called criminals don't include and were not intended to include people that didn't look like me. And the other thing is that I know what people who police us in private do when nobody is looking. I know the language they use. I know their fangs. And I know treatment they subject us to. And the only proof that I have are the scars, mental and physical, that I bear for the rest of my life. I know what it means to stand inside of a courtroom and everybody around you is white. And everybody is minimizing why you didn't go to college, why your parents aren't there, why couldn't they just leave work? Why couldn't you just raise yourself the way they raised their children? Why couldn't you just do it on your own, right? The expectation that African Americans are more mature, stronger, and superhuman than white kids. I know what that feels like, to be accused of failing because I didn't tap into my superhuman black strength. I know the weight of being called an inmate and it resonating in my soul like being called the N-word, and looking into the face of the men and women who policed me and know that they meant it that way. And again, all I got is anecdotes. Don't have statistics. I have friends, however, who suffered worse abuses. I know what it means to be engaged in a prison riot or a fight, and prison guards converge on black circles, but not the white circles. I know what it means to be involved in rehabilitation programs that are designed to make you fully appreciate the community, but only white people are allowed in. I know what it means for society to expect I know what it means. I know what it means not to be here, man. I know what it means not to be here and be locked in a cage and everybody turning a key. White men and white women. I know what it is to draw the parallel between my ancestors and the status of my people today. I know that not much has changed. And I know that now, like then, to enslave my ancestors, the justification that a white society uses is that it was ordained by God or that it is our fault. And I know what it is to reflect on that. And I know what it is to honor my ancestors by never forgetting that connection.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to this next one. We mentioned, Maria, you mentioned racial disparities on one of your slides. And so I just want to talk a little bit further about we mentioned how about black youth are incarcerated and they make up a majority of our youth placement facilities, even though white students have shown the same behavior, yet they either get less time or less fines. So what I'd like to hear from you is a little bit about, like, what are the specific suggestions that you can provide that to help break and stop this pattern?
We're gonna need to have like 10 panels just to discuss that.
Give us a light version.
Sure. I mean, it's a huge question, and I kind of want to take it back to our topic tonight about restorative justice and the arts. Restorative justice is really practices that bring the community back into this process, so that we stop exporting everything and many of our problems in society to the criminal legal system. Mental illness, children who aren't behaving as we want them to, and the list goes on for children and adults. So all of us, I think, what we can do in this audience is really be a community and be involved in our community, and particularly, with children. As much as possible, and yes, including teenage children who many people don't want to go near with a 10-foot pole, I think is our first step. And then in terms of, laws and within the legal system, we need to stop treating children like they're adults when they are still children. And many of you are probably aware of the U.S. Supreme Court precedent in the Miller and Montgomery cases, where the U.S. Supreme Court, said after 200 years of jurisprudence that children are different and children's brains develop differently, right? Every parent knows this. We all know this. Kids are different. But now the U.S. Supreme Court has said it, so there's legal cover for it, that children's brains aren't as developed and they really don't settle down until they're 25, 26, 27. And that coincides with my own experience of feeling like my brain really settled down after 25. So when you treat someone in the system prior to that age the same way that you treat a fully formed adult with a fully formed adult brain, that's really not right, because children are different, and we all know that. My 4-year-old, my teenage nephews don't have the same brain that I have today. So, legally we can stop prosecuting children as adults. We can make that retroactive. Antonio was lucky, very lucky, needle in a haystack lucky, to get the benefit of those decisions. Had that happened, that crime on his 18th birthday, he would still be there, right? So he was exceedingly lucky to have the benefit of that, but hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people nationwide don't. So that is one big thing. And I could go on about that all night, so I won't. I'll stop there. I will pass the mic.
I'm going to actually this one's going to go to Tony. So Tony, when is the right time, and thanks for the great segue, Maria, on the restorative justice. So when is the right time to implement a restorative justice art program? Tell us a little about when is the right time to implement that, and then how does it benefit the community overall?
Okay, so I don't think that there's a time that's too early, and there shouldn't be a part where arts education stops and then all of a sudden is expected to jump back in to intervene in crisis situations. So again, a little bit preventive pays dividends moving forward. I will note that a common thread that I've seen with students is, and I was talking about this earlier with someone, that they were involved in sports programs that once they reach sort of 9th grade, high school age, okay, so not every kid is going to make the varsity team and, whatever their sport of choice is. What then? This is where I've noticed several have told me that they're falling out of activities that are structured and monitored by adults. And again, where they're receiving positive feedback for their efforts and their participation. When this structure it devolves. So as arts is again one portion of that. But again, Maria, as a community, we have to stop thinking of these segments of that are most likely to end up in the justice system as a segment of a community. They are our community. We are one community, and we're gonna pay for it one way or another. And again, the kids that are the extreme examples, for instance, my students that are adults, they will come out. So it's the easy answer of this child did this, so therefore they're an adult. Lock them up, throw away the key. Well, that sounds really easy. The problem is, what are you going to do when they get out? They're back in our community, and again, without the support systems, without infrastructure and everything. The question was, when is a good time? And I say, the good time is not to break that chain of involvement within places to go and positive influences for children. It's much easier if you don't lose them in the first place.
Absolutely, and I want to jump in really quick to tell the audience and those watching that in Erie specifically, we have a few really important needs. We do not have enough places for kids to hang out after school, and particularly into the evening, especially teenage children. I'm sure every one of you who grew up in this town remembers that from our day, as it were, but that continues to be true. Kids need somewhere to hang out. So whether it's open gyms, sports leagues, the neighborhood art house, whatever it is, we really need to expand on those programs and offerings in the Erie community. And also specifically in the Erie community, we don't have enough mental health options for our youth. We are really lacking that here. And so the wait list currently for young people who are involved in the system to get family functional therapy in their home or see mental health professionals is very long because we don't have enough people, and the work is very difficult for them also. So both of those really need expanded and are specific to our city and region.
And I'd like to just add to that with an anecdote about, again, support systems, places to go, safe spaces that, can provide an after-school meal, a counselor if necessary, grief counselors, trauma counselors, etc., a safe place, and a place where, I mean, think about what it is to walk home from school or your bus stop and not feel safe until you get home and lock your door. Violence is happening in these communities so disproportionately. It's zip code specific in a lot of cases. So again, there's such a vast gulf of resources for safe places. I had a child that expressed, and he was in and out, not severe. I don't remember the circumstances exactly of how he ended up as in the adult system. However, once you're in and you violate probation or anything, once you're considered an adult, you're always considered an adult. And I believe he came in at 14, certainly not older than 15 years old. At 15 years old, okay, I would see him, he was released. One time, no, I'm not kidding you, 2 to 3 weeks later, I come back, he's back in and he's smiling. Why are you smiling? What's the matter? No problem. He confided later that it wasn't a big deal, and he did not understand why programs and counselors were talking about ways for these kids to stay out of jail and to comply with probation, which, by the way, also probation, even for juveniles, there's a financial component. If you can't pay the fees, you violated your probation. This is a kid who already grew up in poverty, okay? Not with food insecurity. Again, like I said, safety insecurity. In some cases, kids that have been homeless, okay? But this child said he did not understand the emphasis on people telling them not to come back because in jail he had better food. He felt safer. He felt safer in jail, okay? And better food, yeah, and safer, and knew that he was going to be dry and they were in air conditioning and heat. Again, our society has created a situation where children certain children feel safer locked up in a jail than they do in their own community.
Great point, Tony. Tony, I want to come back to you, and I want to stay on the topic of focusing on the restorative justice art program specifically, and the benefits of it for youth to defeat youth incarceration or to help diffuse or decrease it. So, what would be some key success factors of having a restorative justice art program for our community, for the city of Erie and the town that we love? What would be some key success factors and reasons why we'd want this happening here?
I think we want it happening here because at some point it'll be your children. When they've taken all of ours away, they'll come for yours. I think it's important because healthy environments should be important to all of us. And we should habilitate children into accepting and embracing the power of transformation through processes, not outcomes, processes.
So I'd like to, for the folks in the audience and those that are listening or could possibly be viewing this at some point at their leisure, that may be against, a lot of what we're talking about as far as systemic racism, the need for a solid restorative justice program or restorative justice art program. They don't believe the numbers, they don't believe the content, they're hearing about youth incarceration. Can you each one of you take time to talk, 2 or 3 minutes about what are the long-term consequences if we as adults continue to turn our backs on youth and young adults in our community? Whoever would like to go first.
Sure. Well, actually, why don't you go ahead, one of you gentlemen?
Hey, Tony, you want to start us off? So what are the long-term consequences if adults continue to turn their back on youth and young adults?
The long-term consequences is that we grow up to despise you for abandoning us. Long-term consequences is that we no longer respect healthy social relationships because they've never benefited us. We grow up trying to figure everything out ourselves because we distrust what it is you have to provide us with. We grow up believing that since you don't want us to be a part of this community, we'll create our own hood. We'll create subcultures that make you feel unsafe. We will live and create more people who live, create and die just because we feel like we have a score to settle.
Tony, we'll work back.
I think we've touched on some of the things. The consequences in the end is this cycle is going to continue to repeat, and it's going to continue to escalate. And again, there are so many factors. There are more guns on the street in this country than there are people. Access to people are, I think, in my lifetime, are angrier than I've ever seen them before. Children are of all colors, races, creeds, economic backgrounds are being exposed to constant hostility, and this has become normal. This is a problem that is not going to go away. Again, and as Antonio said, you can't intimidate and beat someone into being a member of a society that has empathy and cares about a culture that does not care about them. Period.
So if we look at the several 100,000 people on the pie chart who are either in prison or under some form of, probation or other supervision in Pennsylvania, the proportion of children on that chart right now is one of the smallest one. But the rest of the pie chart of adults who are involved in the system, a huge majority of them did go through the system as kids. And so I would just echo what Tony said. We are so divided, so polarized, so afraid of each other. People think that if they send their kids to school in the wrong district, their children are ruined. If they live in the wrong neighborhood in Erie, their children are ruined. And what I can tell you, and I think what you're hearing from Antonio, Tony, and I tonight, is that we have dealt with a lot, and known a lot of children in the criminal legal system. And if you have the experience that we have of getting up close and personal, being proximate to these kids, you see what we've seen, which is that they're just kids. And the reasons why they're there are completely understandable when you get close to them and understand the trauma that they've been through. And so, remember that people who perpetuate violence or harm, including children, are almost always people who have been subject themselves to violence or harm. And so, that problem is just going to grow and grow. And I'm here in a personal capacity tonight. I'm not here on behalf of my employer, any organization, but I would say I talk to folks of every stripe. I will talk to anybody about these issues. We will find common ground. And if you don't care about, any of the social or racial or moral issues that we've talked about, then at least you're going to care that this is going to bankrupt us in Pennsylvania, the current prison system, and it's beginning to now. So usually folks care about that and where their taxpayer dollars are going. So I promise we can find common ground, and come seek me out and let's talk about it if you want to talk more.
Can I add one thing to that? Is the question was, what are the consequences? And I'd like to ask, what are the upsides? And I can only ask you to believe me through my personal experience that, we've talked about issues of, these kids are coming into with, almost always there's trauma, physical violence. Again, it's real. But the upside is, again, I can only ask you to believe me from my personal experience, but some of these kids, when you do break through, when you get the trust, when you get a kid to come along, it's humbling that what some of these kids, not only what they faced in the past, but what they're now facing in the future, their capacity for learning, for positivity, for sharing, for determination is humbling. And I think the question too is, like I said, what's the upshot here? And we could be producing and putting kids more on the track of Antonia's example, and it's just because we're not exerting the effort to do so. So
Thank you.
that's it.
So tell me a little bit further about what's one thing that you learned in this process in each of your respective areas that you're here for. What's one thing that you learned through the process that you didn't really know, or that you wouldn't be able to find an answer on the internet?
I'll go first. One of the reasons I think I became a criminal defense attorney was because I was interested in the idea of evil, and I have searched for over 10 years to find what evil is, and who is evil, and why people do what they do. And I have also been in more prisons and met more people accused and convicted of crimes than probably anyone else that you will ever meet. And I can tell you I don't have an answer yet, because when I sit across a table from anyone and talk to them long enough, there is always a human being sitting across from me. And I may not always like them. I may not always want to invite them home with me. I may think a whole bunch of things need to happen in the process that aren't, where we're going to become friends or anything like that. But it's always a person, and there's always a story that makes sense of how we got there. And I learned that people are the petri dishes from whence they came. And I was very lucky to not have a perfect petri dish, but a pretty darn good one. And most of the people that I've met in prison were not as lucky as I was. And so, I continue to search for that, and I'd really love the world to have black and white answers that were easy, but it doesn't. It just doesn't.
Tony, what would you?
I agree with, everything Maria just said, and I think, from coming in is just that, again, learning and understanding, and the difference between, cop shows on television and how people perceive these people, and like I said, there is a human being inside everyone, and absolutely, not everyone. Every kid that I've come along is the easiest to get along with, personality-wise, etc. But every single case is unique. And also, to echo what Maria said, is you referred to it as the petri dish, but the question of nature versus nurture, and what is the ratio that forms the person, and there are two things. One's again, it's been said many times, but these children are not adults. They don't think like adults. I have a 17-year-old nephew who's a great kid, a sweet kid, a good kid. I worry about him all the time. I'm gonna keep worrying about him. I see the impulsivity. I know I was that age a long time ago. There is that. There's the impulsivity of these kids, and so many students I've had, and the one that I was talking about, Johnny, that was killed, was one of them. That I just, I would leave class and just think to myself, oh, just God, please let this kid live to be 25, 28 years old, when they will calm down and see things in an adult perspective. That said, I agree with Maria 100%. Is that most of the kids that I've encountered, they did not have, to the nurture part. They did not have a nurturing environment. They were, I don't think I've ever met a kid you could say was just, there wasn't a kid that was born a monster. And to see that week in and week out, year in and year out, and just to have a front row seat to the cycle, and understanding that, some of my students last year, or all of my students last year, a lot of them, their parents were the age of students that I had when I started. I wish that I could better explain and convey that to people so we understand. Again, it's our problem as a nation, it's our problem as individual states, and as individual communities within those states.
Thank you. Antonio, what would be?
I was just going to say, there's a happy talk y'all came to. So,
Antonio, I'd like to hear from you. So, what would be one thing that you learned in this process? That you could know that you couldn't find on the internet. What can we tell our audience that is something that could stand out that you can't just find on the internet?
That we have an unreasonable expectation that the restorative solutions proposed by very committed members of our community should work exponentially faster than the time it took us to get to this position. That the solutions that we expect to be presented should solve all of the problems it took 400 years to produce. And if they don't work within 2 days, we need to amputate it completely, withdraw funding. And I didn't know that before. I just thought that statistics showed that by and large, programs, restorative programs, creative arts programs, just weren't useful in the school systems and things like that. But I learned that people just wanted to work a lot faster than it took the problem to be created. And somehow we have to get people back to the reality that we worked to get here, even though we don't think that we did. We worked to get to the point that we're at right now. And it's going to take as many resources, it's going to take as many disappointments, ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys, to get to the point where we wanted to.
So, we're talking about restorative justice, and we know restorative justice originated in the criminal system and that side of it to help restoration between victim and offender, for there to be repair and restore. And then, the newer model is in classrooms today, we have something called restorative practices, which is basically restorative justice, but transferred down into a model that can be utilized in the classroom. So they talk about circles where they're rounding up folks and they're having conversation and dialogue. And so it's really important to know what resources, what's available that we can really focus in on and talk more about from a restorative aspect. So in 30 seconds, just quickly, a quick rapid fire, up and back. What would be a book or a magazine, podcast, tool, technique that you'd recommend to the audience that would help them with continuing their learning on restorative justice? And you want to start?
Sure.
And then we'll just go back and forth.
Common Justice, which is an organization run by Danielle Sered, S-E-R-E-D, in Brooklyn. She also has a book, and I believe it's called Until We Reckon, or How We Reckon, is absolutely fantastic, and talks about how 50% of violent crime survivors don't even call the police or come to the system for a whole wide variety of reasons. So we've already lost 50% of community members experiencing harm by the time we even get to the system. So definitely that one. And then I just love what you said about the restorative practices in schools. I'm not familiar with that, but something that I was thinking about and have been thinking about a lot, especially with my own kids, is just really our society's inability and lack of teaching emotional language and emotional intelligence to children. I feel handicapped doing this with my own children. And the best I've got so far is to tell my 4-year-old, are you having big feelings? Mommy has big feelings too, and that's about as far as I've got. So we have a long way to go. I think especially for our men and our young men and boys. And so I hope, it sounds like that's part of it, and that's really amazing.
Thank you. Tony?
Wow. I will suggest, maybe if you have a minute, check out, if on YouTube, search County Missives, which is a short, I think it's 10 minutes, of film that a filmmaker in Jacksonville produced for us inside the facility that I work, and there are some segments where some of the students speak for themselves, and as well one of the juvenile programs coordinator who is retired since, his name is Eric Wesley, for now. And then I'll mention, I think before I started working in the jail, look up an artist named Tim Rollins. KOS, Kids of Survival, was a program in the Bronx in New York that I believe it started in the 1980s. Again, kind of more on the preventative end, as I remember it. He passed away a few years ago, but there's work in museums that is collaborative between Tim Rollins and kids that were in his program, and I believe it's still continuing. There were kids that he worked with that were in their 30s that remained within that network and kept it going. So that's an interesting model.
So a book that I would recommend is called Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. In any restorative justice model, it's important to understand the people, my community, especially for me, and my experiences. And that book is pivotal in that regard.
So I'm going to come back. This is going to be our last question for the night, and then we're going to take questions from our audience. So what I'd like to do is go with Antonio, Tony, and work back to Maria. If there was one thing that you would hope people in the audience today could do as a result of this conversation that took place tonight and what we saw, what would it be? So what would be one thing that you would want our audience here to take away, and what would you want them to do as a result of this conversation?
What I would want them personally to do is come paint at one of my murals. primarily because it's an activity that unifies community, and you'll meet people that you wouldn't ordinarily cross paths with. You'll learn things that you might not be receptive to until you are in a creative environment and you let down your guard.
Thank you.
I would say please advocate, starting with your local elected officials, for these types of programming and for the conversation to consider to completely and utterly rethink how we treat children in this circumstance. And also, if you're able, volunteer with, try to reach a kid, even one kid. It could be frustrating, it could be disappointing, but I promise you it'll be worth it.
Maria, want to close us out?
Sure. I think for me, I just try to internally, I'm trying to internally change myself just as an individual, as being responsible for my entire community. And so for a very long time, we've, given all of our problems to the police, to the criminal justice system, to teachers, and just on the backs of individuals also, like, the children involved in the system or their parents. And so when we see something, I want us to just recognize that this is our community, and even if it's not next door to you, we are part of that. And so to try to change that internal definition, which will then, lead us to do things like, volunteer, mentor. If you can't do that, cut a check, go to Antonio's mural, spread the word, read more, try to change the way that we talk about emotions with the people in our lives. And, conflict reconciliation just with the people, in our immediate circle. All of that counts. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate this section of the Q&A. Now we'll go open it up to audience. So if you have a question in the audience, we do have Mr. Pat Fisher's back here, and he's willing to come around and take questions from you, and then our panel will answer right here on the spot. So who's first?
First off, I want to say thank you for y'all coming out and even putting this together. I guess it's a question and a comment. One of the things was said, it was not enough places for teens or kids to go. And I don't know if that was for general speaking or in the city, because I think that there are a lot of places where kids and teens can go and get some great mentorship. The problem is, if it's not basketball or football, we're not funding that.
Tell us more.
No, serious. I personally know there's programs that's been around Erie for 50, 60 years that'll get kids their pilot license by the age of 17. I talk to my young people about it. They have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm looking at y'all like, what is he talking about? And it's right here in our city. We have a lake. We have a scuba and diving school. Those are jobs, careers, opportunities. We're not funding that. We have Cam TV. They teach you media, classes, all kind of stuff. You can be a reporter, video editor. We're not funding that. But let me say, let's have a game where we need a new basketball team. And he said it himself, how many people are going to go pro? How many people are going to get college scholarships from sports? But we play our whole life. We'll wait our kids to get prepared. We want them to get in all kind of career things in high school. But we've taught them nothing all the way up. Now, when you get to 9th grade, you're supposed to know what you want to be, know what you're supposed to do. So I guess my question is, how are we not going to follow the status quo? and support programs that really support youth.
Thank you.
If I'm hearing you, I definitely agree with, having diversity in programs that are offered and stuff. One of the things is first making them available through funding, transportation to such where, you said on the lake, how is a kid going to get from their school to there, et cetera? These are problems. These are all on us. These are on the grown-ups, the adults. And as far as to which programming and what type of programming that the kids will respond to, again, that's on us, and that starts with listening and talking to them and not at them, and presenting it, and I'm telling you from my experience, is and consistency in being there day in, day out, week in, week out, and some of these, and presenting it in the way that it's an invitation, and they're in fact welcome there. It's not an obligation. It's an invitation to them. It's not an obligation to them, and it's not that the children that need it the most are deeply suspicious of society already. Okay, and they see things as, okay, we're doing things to pat ourselves on the back as far as programs and make ourselves feel better, and for politicians to say, look, we're trying something. We've tried everything. Am I getting to the... so again, that's on the grown-ups, and at first we have to listen. What do kids want? What do you mentioned, television, being a reporter or something, a kid, and having a real answer for them, and a place and a network to let's introduce you to these people. Let's introduce you to this program. Does that help? The answer?
The answer is part of the question.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, one up front.
Real quick, I'd like to provide a little bit of an answer to that. For many of us that are here in person or watching online, we live our life with a certain level of privilege, and it's up to us to leverage that privilege to serve those that have been oppressed. Many of us, we carry our money at a financial institution. You, as a client of that financial institution, can ask them, how are they investing their dollars? What's the community impact of those investments? Are they operating with diversity, equity, inclusion in mind? Each of us can ask that of the financial institution we bank with. We also can ask our employers, what are they investing in, right? We have to leverage our privilege to serve others.
Thank you. So, tonight's conversation, it just touched on so many different layers of the complexities that we know exist, right? And so it seems like we started off the conversation on third base, right, versus going to the dugout. What I mean by the dugout is, and Antonio, you said it well in your articulation when you introduced yourself, in honor of my mom, Peggy, right? And so when we go to the dugout, that's the home front, right? I think and I believe wholeheartedly that, I understand to Tony's point, poverty and criminal behaviors. I get all that. But a part of me, believes that some of the problems that we see within our communities, to a certain extent, we can't blame on the systems, right? We understand that systems, there's inequities and the whole gambit. But in part, the responsibility falls on the parents or the guardian of the home. And so I understand that sometimes the home structure is broken, single parent homes, or, the father's been murdered, the grandmother's raising a child. I get those dynamics, right? And so again, I would love for us to begin to focus on the home front, where these children are being raised in environments where parents are supporting these adversarial behaviors that are destructive to our community. And though tonight's points were very valid and well stated and articulated, again, I thought we landed on third base, but our focus should be a holistic approach, and let's focus on the dugout as well. And then we begin to move forward as a community, because oftentimes when we don't focus on the home front, we start to cast the blames on others, then it becomes some type of shouting match, and we're like spinning our wheels. So in closing, again, very well-spoken presentation tonight, but again, I just want us to focus on, from my vantage point, it starts at home.
I think there's a misconception that when we propose solutions to problems that plague our communities, that it's binary, right? That your solution means that the other solutions shouldn't be pursued simultaneously, right? And in this society, there are multiple problems converging on us at once, right? And no one solution is going to get us out of the situation that we're in. What has to happen is the conversation has to happen. And whatever you can bring to the table to contribute toward the part of the solution that we might be overlooking, then you get up here and do that. And we work together in that pursuit. But starting at the home front suggests that starting at the home front should be our only start. And I'm not saying that that's what you said. This is not an argument, but this is, we should start at the home front and we should focus on. Those were your words. And I agree with those words. However, we can do all of that simultaneously. But what you should do is lead that charge. I know art. You should lead that charge, and I'll follow you. When I'm doing art, you come down to my murals and you follow me and you defer to my wisdom. And I'll defer to yours with your solutions. That way we come together, right? And you not telling me I should be over here focusing on this. He not telling me, well, we should start here first. And us sitting in a room spinning our wheels.
That wasn't my suggestion. Right? My suggestion was, again, everything was well articulated, but I just heard one side of the paradigm. And so when we're addressing the system, it has to be a holistic approach. And so in part, I agree, we must address the whole system, but we can't not talk about the system without identifying certain paradigms that exist in the system that triggers other movements that spill over into the community, that gets into, that lands us into the systems that we know are systemically oppressive.
Yeah, we all want the same thing, and I know that for a fact. And yeah, it's not micro or macro; it's both micro and macro. And so I agree. And we only had an hour and a half tonight, and next time we'll get into that for sure. Thank you.
I just want to real quick, I know I'm the moderator, but I think just listening to Antonio and to Michael's perspective, what I'm taking is that you both are saying the same. I hear the same message coming through. At least that's what my ears are taking in. I hear you saying work together, right? And that it's multifaceted. And I hear Michael saying that it's a holistic approach, which those both are pretty much one and the same, right? Because it's going to take a whole group of folks, and it's going to take a multifaceted approach to go at it. But I think what I'm hearing Michael say, and I think what we have to get to the point in Erie, and the right people have to, not the right people, but everybody that has a pulse, and if you have a passion and you want to make change in this community, then you got to step up. And it don't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, Nepali, it doesn't matter. It matters from the holistic that we have to step up immediately and do something now. And we can't wait on elected officials, and we can't wait on funding. We have to do something as a right now. And so, like, when you set the charge, like, step up, and people are going to have to take lead. And it might be a very difficult process, difficult conversation. There's going to be hatred. We know how that works. We see that a lot in our community, just amongst each other, especially in black and brown populations. But what the main thing is going to be is that we all have to come together. We do. We have to have that conversation. Like, we all got to get at the table. And I don't know what specific group, and Mike, I know we've talked about that, but it has to be a concentrated, formal group that comes together, and it's open and embraces everybody. And there's goals and tasks that are set, and people are taking charge and going at it. And I mean, that's really, I mean, in my perspective of being born and raised in this community, seeing where we're at now, where we never had people shot, killed, murdered weekly, or maybe even every other day. I mean, you might even barely see somebody die in 4 or 5 years. To now that we're at this point where we see this heightened, intensity from the streets, and the only way it's going to change is if the people in the community, the people that have that passion and that really want to do something, we do something. But the talk and the point fingers and hope he does this is not going to get us there. So it is multifaceted, it is holistic, and I do agree with you that we got to find we have to, maybe it's the top 3 areas that we go after. If it's home, school district, art, whatever it be, those top 3 areas that we're all going to agree upon, but we take charge and we support it.
And I just add that, to your sentiment, Ken, that, again, I don't see these 2 points as being mutually exclusive, and I'm hearing a message of personal responsibility from parents and homes, but also maybe it's all of our responsibility as a community and then also as government to do what we can to level the playing fields for those homes, right? For parents and everything. And let's be honest, a single parent or a grandparent raising a child, or a single parent that's having to work multiple jobs, is not physically, it's not possible to provide the oversight for 2 kids or 3 kids or anything than a 2-parent household that's, say one parent is to stay at home. So again, I hear you and I believe you, but also, again, in a holistic approach would, to me anyway, mean providing parents, all parents, single parents, with the best opportunity, or doing what we can to level the playing field and provide them with the best opportunity, both education and the physical means to be the best parents and the best guardians that they can for their children. So again, I think there's common ground in both perspectives.
Absolutely.
But you come down in my mural and work your magic. That's what you do.
Yeah, he's up there with a spray paint can.
Yeah.
A lot of learning being had here, so thank you all so much. Maria, you had a really good letter to the editor in the paper this week in Erie. Am I correct?
Yes, but I am here in a personal capacity tonight. So
All right. Well, you've been very good to separate that personal capacity from your work, but your work maybe addresses some of what Mr. Nixon just described as we all want to do something. And to Antonio's point, many of us are amputated from the restorative process. We're also really amputated from the criminal justice system process. Where does one intervene? So, as state policy director for FAM, if it's appropriate, can you tell us what FAM is, what you do, and while it seemingly takes forever to have change at a state level, is there something you can identify that we can all work on right now in Erie at the city or the county level to redress an ill that's perpetuating this cycle? So for an example, it was mentioned earlier that some children that are in and out of the system are due simply to being hit with monetary fines for a parole violation. Can we undo that and change that at this local level, or do we have to wait for a long time for an act at the state level? Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer this briefly because I see it's getting dark outside. So as FAM State Policy Director, I'm trying to bridge the gap between what I saw as a person in my community, as a criminal defense lawyer for a decade in Erie and Florida and New York City, and what I see happening in laws at the state level. And so, we are working up at FAM a wide variety of legislation aimed at ending a lot of mandatory one-size-fits-all sentencing, working on expanding medical and geriatric parole, creating more pathways for people to show that it doesn't make sense to incarcerate them anymore, particularly after decades of incarceration, which again, as taxpayers, we are paying an arm and a leg for. And it is not making us safer, it is not improving our communities, and we now have decades of data to show that. So trying to pass legislation, writing legislation, talking to lawmakers, and talking to people all over the state to do, to the gentleman in the back who spoke about, hey, this is what we have in Erie. Part of what I'm trying to do as policy director is talk to people all over the state, whoever you are, wherever you live, and tell me what you're interested in, tell me what you're doing, tell me what your community is doing, to try to build that network. Because what I'm finding is, the human network is actually very powerful. And so I did want to say to everybody that, whatever thing, small or big, that you can do, it is extremely valuable, even if it is just having a conversation about these issues with somebody else. For people and by the way, that's something that's really hard in these areas, because you feel the problems are so insurmountable that it feels like if you are not, at the top of the power pyramid, if you don't have a magic wand, if you don't have all the money, what you're doing isn't valuable, and that's not the case. So again, whatever you can do, whether it's $5 or a conversation, volunteering an hour, going down to paint just one time to see what it's like, that is valuable. At the local level, for an entree into the criminal legal system, just go to court. I mean, that county courthouse is a mystery and wrapped in an enigma for most of the people in our county. It is open to the public, except for proceedings involving children, but adult proceedings are open to the public, and the public should know what happens and be familiar. So there has been talk about developing programs to more formally organize that, but I would say just walk in and watch it and see what the process is like. The intake process for preliminary hearings, plea hearings, sentencings, and you may be really happy by some of what you find, and you may be really unhappy with some of what you find, but go and see for yourself and just watch. There are groups in Erie that are working around a lot of these issues. There are a lot of organizations in Erie, like the Boys and Girls Club, the Neighborhood Art House, the Booker T. Washington Center, MLK, tons of places that need money, volunteer, and time. There are a lot of elections that implicate the criminal justice system, including locally, that historically people have not paid attention to. And so, I think there's a lot that can be done, and I'd be very happy to continue that conversation with anybody offline. Thank you.
I am going to just make a few comments to wrap up, but first I really want to thank Ken, Maria, Tony, and Antonio for everything this evening. So I think that in some ways privilege can be defined as assuming an issue isn't a problem simply because you're not proximate to it. But naivete is assuming that you don't know someone within your life who hasn't been impacted by it. And, you'll hear my voice quivering because it's hard to not care. It's hard to not be upset. It's hard to not be pissed off at a system that is broken when you love somebody and care about someone who has been impacted by this. And it's hard to have elected officials and donors and funders that seemingly contribute to the same thing, and nothing's getting resolved and we're not talking about it. And I really hope that what we are doing here tonight is just the start. It's not a one and done. And as a community, we continue to come together until we see this resolved, and that we are committed to the solution. Because I think oftentimes we attack symptoms. We put funding towards symptoms. We dedicate time to symptoms, and we don't go after the root problem. And if we don't solve the system the symptom will return. So as a member of the community this evening, I'm going to ask you all to be dedicated to solving the system. And the system is holistic. It's at the home, it's at the community, it's at the school, it's in the workplace, it's what we see in the criminal justice system, it's all of it. And I think Antonio hit it on the head. It's not a either or, it's not a binary. It's everything all at once. And it takes individuals who have a part to play to show up and to do that part. And it's going to look different for each of us. For some of us, it's volunteering. For some of it's our profession. And for others, it's donating. And for some, or all of us, it's about who we elect into office, whether at a local level, at a state level, or at a national level. So I'm going to encourage you all. We have an election coming up, not many weeks away, for a local level. Call your politicians. Ask them what they're doing about the system. Ask them what their opinions are of the system. Ask them what solutions they have to the system. And this feels almost dirty to do in this moment, but on the way out, there's some dip jars. Those donations go to Erie Arts and Culture, and if you're interested in what we're talking about this evening, and you'd like to see more programs in place that are not only about restorative justice, but also preventative measures to keep kids out of trouble, please consider making a donation, and I guarantee you that 100% of that donation will go to support those types of programs. And again, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everybody that's here, everybody that's watching online, and I hope this is only the start of the conversation. Thank you.